There is a type of person who confuses money with value, who thinks that because they have more, they are worth more, who treats people below them as if they are invisible. Have you ever met someone like that? I have, and I am going to tell you their story. But pay attention, because this story does not end the way he imagined. Hi, I'm Peter, and welcome to Whisk English. In today's video, you are going to learn English in a different way, by listening to a story, full of emotion. You are going to absorb new vocabulary, natural sentences, pronunciation, all of that without even noticing, just by listening. This is called listening practice, and it is one of the most powerful ways to learn a language. So do this. Grab a coffee, grab a tea, find a comfortable place to sit, and relax. Because today you are not going to study English, you are going to feel English. The story starts now. His name was Richard. Richard Moore. 42 years old. Gray suit. Red tie. Every day the same clothes. Every day the same expression. An expression that said without words, I am better than you. Richard lived in an enormous mansion. 5 bedrooms, 3 floors, a swimming pool that nobody used. He had cars he never drove, clothes he never wore. He had everything. But there was one thing Richard did not know how to have: respect. Every morning, he walked down the stairs and found the house staff. There were 4 people: Maria, who cleaned the rooms; Carlos, who took care of the garden; Anna, who cooked; and James. James was the butler. Quiet, polite, always in clean clothes, always standing straight. James did everything right. Always. But for Richard, it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough.
Maria scrubbed the floor on her knees for hours. Her hands red and raw. Her knees aching. Sweat running down her face. She finished, stood up, and looked at the floor. It was spotless. Then she heard Richard's footsteps. He walked in, glanced down for 1 second, and said, without stopping, without looking at her, "Maria, this floor is dirty. Do it again," and kept walking, as if she were not a person, as if she were part of the furniture. Carlos arrived at 6 in the morning, before the sun. He cut the grass, trimmed the edges, watered the plants, arranged every leaf of the garden with the care of someone who loves what they do. At 8, Richard came out the back door, looked around for 2 seconds, and said, "Carlos, this grass is too long. You don't know how to work, do you? I should send you back to your third world country," and went back inside. Carlos held his breath, closed his eyes for 1 second, and went back to work. Anna cooked with her heart. She knew the favorite dishes of everyone in the house. She knew Richard liked his scrambled eggs with very little salt. She knew he preferred his coffee strong. She woke up early, prepared everything with attention, placed the plate on the table at the right temperature at the right time. Richard sat down, picked up his fork, took 1 bite, put the fork back on the plate, pushed it to the side, and said, "Anna, this food is cold. Can you not even do this right?"
Anna went to the kitchen, closed the door, and cried quietly,
with her apron pressed against her mouth so nobody could hear. But James heard more than anyone. Richard saved his longest humiliations for him, the most calculated ones, the ones that hurt the most. Not because James made more mistakes, but because James reacted less. And for Richard, the absence of reaction was an invitation to go further. James, you took 3 minutes to open that door. 3 minutes. Do you know what I can do in 3 minutes? James stood still. James, this glass has a mark on it. 1 mark, James. Is this what you call work? James looked at the glass. There was no mark. James, you are slow. You have always been slow. I do not know why I still keep you here. James lowered his head. James, you do not know how to do anything right. Absolutely nothing. And Richard turned his back, as if James did not exist, as if those words weighed nothing, as if a human being could be treated like that every single day and simply not feel it. But James felt it. James always felt it. He just never let Richard see. And while Richard was destroying the people around him, there was someone watching everything. Someone who was present at every humiliation, at every word thrown away like garbage, at every look of contempt. Someone who stayed quiet, but who was not sleeping. She was waking up. Slowly. A little more every single day. That person was Eleanor, Richard's wife, and she had her own story that Richard never bothered to learn. Her name was Eleanor, Eleanor Moore. But Eleanor was not just Richard's wife. Eleanor was the reason the mansion existed. The money was hers. The inheritance was hers. The investments, the properties, the accounts, everything was hers. Richard knew that, but he pretended he did not. He pretended so well that sometimes it seemed like he believed his own lie. At dinner, Richard talked. He talked about business, about himself, about his opinions on the world. And Eleanor listened. At social events, Richard shone in the center of the room, and Eleanor stood in the corner, smiling politely at people whose names she barely knew. In bed, Richard fell asleep heavily, right after turning off the light. And Eleanor lay there, staring at the ceiling, in the dark, listening to the silence, and thinking about things she could not name. Eleanor watched everything. She watched when Richard humiliated Maria in front of guests, as if it were funny, as if it were normal. She watched when he pushed the plate back to Anna and raised his voice in the kitchen. She watched when he pointed his finger at James and spoke slowly in a loud voice, with that condescending tone of someone who thinks the other person understands nothing, when in reality, it was Richard who understood nothing. He did not understand that every word left a mark. He did not understand that the people around him were stronger, more intelligent, and more dignified than he would ever be. And he did not understand, above all, that the woman who shared his bed was watching everything, storing everything, and getting, every day, a little closer to the edge.
With every scene Eleanor witnessed, something inside her grew colder. Like water slowly losing its temperature without anyone noticing. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Until one day, the marriage was cold, frozen, and there was no warmth in the world capable of melting what had formed inside her heart. That day came on a Tuesday. Richard came home at 11 at night. No phone call, no warning, no care. Eleanor was sitting in the living room, a cold cup of tea in her hand, and her eyes fixed on the door. Not with hope, that had left a long time ago, but with decision. He walked in, did not look at her, threw his jacket on the sofa, and shouted toward the kitchen, "James, I need water!" It was almost midnight. James came, as he always came, fast, quiet, without complaint. He brought the water, placed it on the table, stepped back. Richard drank. He did not say thank you. He never said thank you. For him, to thank someone would be to admit that the other person had done something that mattered. And Richard did not acknowledge anything that was not himself. Eleanor looked at James for a moment. James looked at her. A quick look, full of things that neither of them had said out loud, but that both of them knew were there. Then Eleanor placed her cup on the table. Carefully, slowly, without rush, with the calm of someone who has already made a decision and is no longer afraid of it. And she said, with a quiet voice that Richard had never heard before, "I want a divorce." Richard laughed, threw his head back, made a face of pure mockery, as if Eleanor had just told the funniest joke he had ever heard. He thought it was tiredness, stress, one of those things people say and do not mean. But Eleanor was not tired. Eleanor was, on the contrary, more awake than she had ever been. And while Richard went to sleep that night, still laughing, Eleanor was already in the guest room, phone in hand, sending a message to the best law firm in the city. Eleanor's lawyers were relentless. In 3 months, everything was signed, everything settled, everything over. The mansion? Eleanor's. The cars? Eleanor's. The accounts, the investments, the properties? All Eleanor's. Always had been. The papers now simply confirmed what had always been true. Richard left with his suitcases, his gray suit, and his red tie. And nothing else. He went to live in a small apartment on a street he would never have looked at before. Thin walls that let the neighbors' noise through. A window with a view of another building. A narrow kitchen where he barely knew what to do with himself. The kind of place that, back when he was rich, he would have called deplorable. Now, it was all he had. He tried to work, but it had been years, many years, since Richard had done any real work. He had always lived on Eleanor's money, always had her comfort as his foundation, always used her name as his credential. Without Eleanor, Richard was just a middle-aged man with no skills, no humility, and no references. The money that remained slipped through his fingers, slowly, 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 like sand, like time, like everything he once had and did not know how to keep. Meanwhile, at the mansion, life continued. But in a different way. In a better way. Maria cleaned the floor, and nobody said it was dirty. Carlos tended the garden, and nobody complained about the grass.
Anna cooked with joy, and the people sitting at the table said thank you, said it was delicious, said simple things that make all the difference in the world. The mansion was the same. The walls, the rooms, the swimming pool, all the same. But the energy of the place had changed completely. Because what made that house heavy was not its size. It was Richard. And James? James was still quiet, still polite, still standing straight. But there was something different about him now. Something that before had to be kept inside, contained, hidden. Because during all those years when Richard humiliated Eleanor at dinners, at parties, in the silences of the early morning, James was the only one who asked how she was. The only one who noticed when she was sad. The only one who truly listened. And Eleanor had noticed. Eleanor had always noticed.
What started in quiet conversations in the kitchen, in looks exchanged in the hallway, in words spoken softly when Richard was not around, grew slowly and with respect. 6 months after the divorce, Eleanor and James had dinner together for the first time, just the two of them, in a simple restaurant far from the mansion. 1 year later, they were truly together. 2 years later, they were married. It was a small ceremony with no performance, no show. Only the people who mattered. Maria was there. Carlos was there. Anna was there. All of them with bright eyes. James, in a perfectly pressed suit, held Eleanor's hand, and she smiled in a way she had not smiled in a very long time. A smile that came from inside, that came from far away. The mansion, on that day, had the most beautiful sound it had ever had. The sound of people who were truly happy. 2 years passed. Eleanor and James' life moved forward quietly, built with care, with gratitude, with the kind of love that does not shout but is always present. And Richard? Richard had disappeared from everyone's lives. Nobody asked about him. Nobody missed him. Until one cold morning in October, the doorbell of the mansion rang.
It was an October morning. The sky was gray. The wind was sharp. Dry leaves hit the ground at the entrance. James was in the living room when he heard the doorbell. He walked to the door. He opened it. And he stopped. Standing outside was a man. An old, faded coat. Worn shoes with the soles starting to come apart. Hair that was once always perfectly combed, now messy and uncared for. A face that was once always tense with arrogance, now tired, marked. The kind of tired that does not come from one bad night, that comes from within, that comes from a long time carrying the weight of someone who got lost. In Richard Moore's eyes, where there had once been contempt,
There was now something he had spent his entire life avoiding. Need. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. The wind moved the leaves on the ground. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing easy to say. And then Richard opened his mouth. With a low voice. Rough. A voice he barely recognized as his own. The voice of a man who had learned the hardest lesson there is. I came to ask if you need someone to work here. The words fell into the air like stones.
James did not answer immediately. He looked at Richard with calm, without accumulated anger, without a smile of revenge, without the desire to humiliate that Richard had never been able to control. Only with that deep calm of someone who knows who they are, who built their own dignity with their own hands, day after day, even when someone tried to take it away, who never needed to make someone else smaller to feel bigger. Then James took one step to the side, opened the door a little wider, and said with the same quiet voice he always had, "Come in. I will go and let my wife, Eleanor, know you are here." There was no triumph in those words, no cruelty, no "do you remember me?" no "funny how things change, isn't it?" Only dignity. The same dignity that Richard had spent years trying to take from James, throwing it away as if it were worth nothing, and that James had never lost, not once, not for a single second. Richard stepped inside the mansion. He stopped in the middle of the hall. He looked around, at the paintings on the walls, at the chandelier on the ceiling, at the staircase he once walked down every morning as if he owned the world, at the garden outside where Carlos still worked with the same dedication, the same quiet love for what he did. Everything the same, and everything completely different, because the walls were the same, but the weight of the place had changed, because now the mansion had a soul, because now the mansion had love, because now the person in charge was someone who deserved it. James closed the door, carefully, without rush, and went to find Eleanor. They say that what you plant, you harvest. Richard planted humiliation every day for years with patience and consistency. And he harvested loneliness. He harvested the silence of a mansion that existed only in his memory now. He harvested the cold wind of an October morning, standing at a door that was once his, asking for a job. James planted respect. He planted silence when silence was necessary. He planted dignity when it would have been easier to disappear. And he harvested everything. Not because the world is always fair. The world often is not. But because people who know who they are, people who do not need applause to keep standing, people who do not break under the weight of someone else's cruelty, those people arrive. They always do. But here is the part that matters most. The part I want you to carry with you after this video. James did not become Richard. James did not rise and forget where he came from. He did not treat Richard the way Richard had treated him. Because people like James do not change who they are
when life changes around them, they rise, and they remain themselves, and that is exactly what makes them rise. His name was James, and he never needed to shout to be heard.